Hello, Dr. Childress here. In this video segment, I'm going to be discussing the symptom pathology of splitting. Splitting is an incredibly important symptom in this family pathology because of what it tells us about the nature of the pathology. Splitting is defined in psychiatry and clinical psychology as a polarization of attitudes. Most of us have the ability to move from extremes and into sort of a mid-ground of ambivalence and then over to the other extreme. I love somebody very much. There's good and bad qualities, and this person is kind of a bad person. So we have a spectrum of emotions and reactions and relationships with people. In splitting, that middle ground is lost. And so it moves to the extremes, either extreme love and bonding or extreme rejection and hatred. And it bounces back and forth. There's no middle ground. So it jumps from one extreme to the other, splitting. Now, if we think about the brain and how the brain accomplishes splitting, there's not actually areas. It doesn't, a piece of your brain just doesn't start to migrate to a different area. The brain is the brain. What happens is we have neurological circuits, and there's two systems. One for bonding, and the bonding system is going to be the love and the wonderful positive feelings side of things. And then we have one for avoidance, and that's going to be the rejection side of things. I hate you, I don't like you, you're an awful human. And so we're gonna have bonding and rejection neurological networks, two systems. Now, for most of us, those two systems can be on at the same time. So I can have good feelings about you and think you're pretty terrific, but I can also understand that you have negative things about you and you're pretty annoying and irritating as well. And so the two systems on at the same time create that middle ground, that ambivalence and just sort of a gray area that we all have. So both systems being on at the same time gives us that wide spectrum of attitudes and belief about people. Now, these two systems, though, also have cross-inhibitory networks associated with them. And so if I like you, if I think you're pretty wonderful, then I tend to see all the positive things about you. That's called a positive halo. So you get this glow of positivity about you, and I tend to minimize kind of your negative qualities if I like you. If I don't like you, I tend to focus on your negative qualities and I kind of amplify those, and I minimize your positive qualities because I'm more focused over here. That's called a negative halo. And so there's this minor cross inhibition between the two networks, but for the most part they can both be on, and I can have a range of feelings about people. Now, what happens in splitting is that inhibitory network gets really buffed out. So if I love you, if I feel good about you, it entirely inhibits the other network, the rejection network, the avoidance network. It's turned off. If this one's on, this one is turned off. And conversely, if this one is on, if the rejection system is on, then the bonding system is entirely turned off. That inhibitory network comes down and just shuts it down. And so we only get one system or the other is on at any given time, and we lose that mid-range because of that. We don't have both systems on at the same time. Either one is on or the other is on, and that's your polarization, that's your splitting. And we know how that happens in the brain. It's a response to trauma. It's a response to a child who's trying to bond to a parent who's both a source of nurture and a source of danger at the same time. And so both systems for the child is motivated to bond to the parent, but that parent's a source of danger, so they're motivated to flee from that parent, but then they flee and seek the protection of your protective parent, who is the parent who is a danger, and it just goes, and it just fries their motivational system. So in order to get a single motivational directive towards a parent, as a child tries to bond to a parent who's both frightening and a source of nurture, to get a single motivational directive, the brain has to buff out those inhibitory networks. So if the bonding system is on, the avoidance system is entirely shut down. That way I only get one motivation, to bond. And all the avoidance and fear stuff and anxiety is turned off. And so now I can bond to a parent who's dangerous. Or conversely, if I seek to avoid the dangerous parent, I have to turn off all the bonding motivations. So I'm not motivated to bond to this dangerous parent, and I can flee and avoid that parent, get a single motivation. So that's the origins of this splitting pathology. It has to do with the cross inhibition of the two systems in response to childhood trauma. Now, splitting as a symptom is characteristic of only two pathologies in all of mental health. And I challenge my mental health colleagues, go through the DSM, go through all the different types of pathologies and look at their symptoms. Do you see splitting anywhere? No. Not in ADHD, not in oppositional defiant, not in trauma disorder. You never see splitting except narcissistic and borderline personality. Those are the only pathologies that show splitting as a symptom. And narcissistic and borderline pathology are actually variants of the same underlying pathology. And I would refer you to Otto Kernberg on that. They are different variants of that. And now if we drop down below that and understand these two personalities from an attachment perspective, the narcissistic and borderline personalities are both variants of disorganized attachment. The narcissist is a disorganized attachment with anxious avoidant overtones. The borderline disorganized attachment with anxious ambivalent overtones. So we're essentially looking at disorganized attachment. It's just whether the narcissist sacrifices love for safety, the borderline sacrifices safety for intimacy. And what happens is on this with the child who's trying to bond to a frightening and nurturing parent is the narcissist will give preference to the avoidance system. They'll give preference to the safety rather than bonding. And so they're able to structure up a little bit better because they're not dealing with all the anxiety of trying to bond to a dangerous parent. On the borderline side of things, though, the borderline sacrifices safety for intimacy. So the borderline is still trying to bond to a dangerous parent. And that's going to create all sorts of anxiety and prevent them from sort of structuralizing up as high as the narcissist because they're having to deal with all this anxiety. But one of the treatment implications is as we try to treat the narcissist, they've sacrificed love. They are psychologically empty inside. They are safe, but empty. And so it's a harder treatment over here because they have no love. Whereas the borderline at least is trying to get love. The love system is still open. It's scared. Anxiety is off the charts. And so they get really hypersensitive to any rejection because that could mean danger for them. But they are at least trying to get love. And so it's an easier treatment prognosis over on the borderline side of things. So that splitting pathology, when we see splitting, we absolutely know we have personality pathology here. And that's such a key symptom that mental health professionals need to understand the importance of that symptom and the implications of that symptom. Now, where we will see it in attachment-related pathology surrounding divorce is we're going to see it in the child's attitude toward the targeted parent. You're going to see it as demonization. You're going to see that polarized demonization quality. Will you see the idealization? Potentially. But it won't be as flamboyantly displayed as is the demonization. The demonization is going to be clear for the targeted parent. They're awful. There's nothing good about them. They're terrible. They're abusive. They're all these extremely bad things. And there's no compensatory positive feelings towards that parent or even a middle ground. It's just all extreme. So that's the one of the places we will see that splitting pathology, very distinctive, very powerfully, is in the child's attitudes towards the targeted parent. The other place we will see splitting, and this is what a lot of mental health people don't understand about splitting, is it's rigid. When you get the jump from one pole to the other, it gets locked in there. They don't have ambivalent capacity. They don't have shades of gray. So it gets rigidly locked in. And so Marsha Linehan, talking about the borderline and splitting, says that with splitting, once things are defined, they don't change. They're not able to anticipate future changes in things or allow for future change in everything. It gets locked up in this. So that you will see in the child's, again, a very characteristic symptom, that the child is unable to change relative to the targeted parent. The thing that happened in the past 2 years ago is a reason that I'm going to reject this parent forever. That's a classic symptom of splitting, that things don't change. Once defined, they get locked in forever. So that pathology or that symptom set is also very characteristic of splitting. So as a mental health professional doing the assessment, look for the extreme polarization, the demonization of the parent, and then the child has a locked-in attitude that does not accommodate to change, and that the past events will therefore define all future events. That's splitting. The moment you see splitting, you know you have a narcissistic or borderline personality somewhere in the family. Is it with the child? No, it's not with the child. Children don't have personality disorders. So where are you getting the pathology? From the parent. I've got a parent. If I see splitting in the child, I've got a parent with splitting that's influencing the child. Lock solid. Lock solid. If I see splitting in the child, where else does the child get splitting? It's a neurological thing. It's a neurological cross-inhibition of neurological networks that is produced by childhood trauma. Does this child have childhood trauma? No. Then where does a child get the splitting? It's characteristic of only 2 pathologies. Narcissistic, borderline. Is the child narcissist? No. Is the child borderline? No. Then where are they getting the splitting? From the parent. They're being influenced by a narcissistic borderline parent to acquire the splitting pathology. Is that narcissist and borderline parent the targeted parent? No. How can the targeted parent is not a narcissist influencing the child to develop splitting pathology relative to demonizing them? There's no pathway by which that occurs. It's not the targeted parent who is creating the splitting pathology in their kid. Okay, they have no influence on the kid. The allied parent, of course. It's the allied parent's attitudes that the kids are expressing towards the other parent. It's the allied parent who has a splitting pathology towards the other spouse. They are a bad spouse. They rejected me. They're a demonized spouse. And then that spouse is getting translated into parent for the child's pathology. So the parent is using the child as a weapon against the other parent. Splitting, the splitting symptom alone, is diagnostic of which parent is causing the pathology. Mental health people don't understand that. They don't understand splitting. They don't understand personality pathology. They don't understand family pathology. And that's really a problem, because once we understand personality pathology, Kernberg, Linehan, Milan, Beck, once we understand personality pathology, the symptoms just jump up at us, and it's really easy to recognize. Now, I did not use splitting because it seems to be beyond mental health people to actually apply constructs and principles. So for ABPA, the symptoms that we're using, the attachment system suppression, the personality disorder pathology, of which splitting is one of them, and the delusional symptoms. So I've gone way overboard on the diagnostic indicators, that they are just locked down solid, because just splitting alone will tell me where the pathology is coming from. So that's the importance of the splitting pathology within all of this.